And we're live. Thank you for joining us for the third panel discussion of the day. Uh, we're going to be discussing creating a responsible AI ecosystem. And we have three very knowledgeable, whoops,
Ladies.
knowledgeable ladies. Sorry, I got a feedback loop from my other tab. Um, yeah, let's start with a little bit of a self introduction. We're going to hear about who everybody is, what they do for a living, and their area of specialization, and then we'll dive in. Ashley, Faith, it's a pleasure to have you again.
Thank you. I am Ashley Faith. I have a whole YouTube channel where I focus on knowledge graphs and semantics and search and AI and how all of those things play together. But I also have a full time job being a data scientist, and I work at a company called EBSCO, and we deal with a lot of the research in academia out there and how you can make sure that people have access to it and be able to search across it. So that's what I do in my day job and the things that I do to help out in the community.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley. Shaista, would you like to give us a little background?
Hi, Dr. Shaista. I am a pathologist turned machine learning engineer. I focus on all aspects of responsible and explainable AI as the co-founder and CEO of SafeCheck. We run risk audits on AI systems, any type of AI systems, looking at things like environmental safety, data quality, model efficiency, all the way through to child safety and risk of hallucinations. It's great to be amongst these wonderful, very talented people, and I'll pass the mic to Ruchika.
Awesome. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Ruchika Israni. I am currently an AI leader at Deloitte Canada. I lead the Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence, and I'm focused on rolling out internal facing products. I have a team, brilliant team, diverse team, and um, one of the focuses I have is also rolling out the responsible AI framework, not just internal facing, but also the external facing. And outside of Deloitte, I'm passionate about giving back to the community. So I have co founded an AI product management study group. I am the education leader for Women in AI Canada chapter. And I'm really passionate about the diversity in tech and making sure that we are building, AI with keeping in mind safety as well as responsibility.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. I cannot be more enthusiastic. You guys are just beginning to see this panel discussion, but we were, as soon as we entered the chat, we were beginning to have a very lively discussion. So maybe let's paint the context a little bit about what is an ecosystem. I'd like to just dissect some of these words so that we can have a better context.
I mean, I can start, but as a preface to that, I think Ruchika mentioned something now that Ashley mentioned prior to us going live. And I think it's the thread that connects everything we're going to talk about, which is the responsibility aspect. And the word responsibility means it's an onus upon everyone who is using AI solutions, everyone who's building it, and notably, as Ashley mentioned, everyone who's teaching others how to build. And so those are sort of the seeds of that ecosystem. The ecosystem is a playground where AI infiltrates, and it involves those who are building, playing, using, and doing ideations off of it, including new companies that have been built. How many hundreds of thousands of companies have been built just off of other existing AI technologies, where in doing so, the responsibility sort of gets pushed back and gets pushed back until it doesn't exist. So I think that's my version of an ecosystem, but the thread is the responsibility aspect and everyone taking upon themselves that responsibility.
I think there's a part in there too that, you know, why is that such a struggle? And I'm sure there's lots of parts to that we can unpack, and we certainly will probably in this discussion. But one of the things that I'm really fascinated by the interplay is there's been such a push for open science for quite some time. That's in the publishing space, in the academic space, and that's we can move farther by sharing and building on each other, right? Like what Shasta was saying about building on what others have done. But then there's the other aspect of it that's now coming into play, which is, but then what if I take what you've done and I do something with it and you don't know what I did with it and I didn't tell you that I did something with it and now I'm making, I don't know, a new company on your data that I took from the open web. And it's like, oh, okay, we're good with sharing, but like not that kind of sharing. So I feel like there's like some weird, strange amalgamation of open science and ethics that's like going to come and publishing too, like that's kind of coming out from a lot of this. It's certainly not decided on, but it's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, and just to add to the discussion, completely agree with what you mentioned, Dr. Saishta and Ashley. Um, Ecosystem is, a combination of all of these things coming together, right? The people, the organization, and the technologies, right, all coming together. And I think that's why it's so hard, right? When we talk about from a technology aspect, we have the data sources, right? The algorithms, models, the computing infrastructure, um, any kind of software development tools. When we talk about the people, so it's not just the data scientists and the engineers who build the technology, but the users who are actually using it as well, and the communities, the research communities, and so on, and the different organizations, right? So getting like all of this together, I think that is the that's the really hard part. In my opinion. But I think it's such a beautiful ecosystem, and we also have to keep in mind about the regulatory and ethical frameworks, as we are building these technologies. So that's my contribution.
Well said. That leads us into a good way to discuss what the risks are, and then therefore why there's a need for those regulatory frameworks at multiple
Mhm.
levels, whether it be local or national. Again, I'm going to reiterate that I think it's at an individual level, which should be international. It should be an individual onus, which comes down to, again, what Ashley said, and the right education. So I think with the right education, new machine learning engineers or data scientists can be trained to respect things like metadata and giving appropriate royalties to those who deserve it. But then you run that takes us into the risks, where risks are people are using training data, as Ashley mentioned, without getting fair recompense, or they are very rapidly being told, and I always mention this in all our talks, that there's company owners that just say deploy, 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 and they take any working algorithm and any available data set. And I guess, Ruchika, this comes in a bit to where you have your specialty as well. At what point has anybody taken a quality check or a milestone check and said, is this the best algorithm, or is this the best data to be used? And that's something we're doing in SafeCheck, is we're imposing that on people through our risk assessments. And what I've noticed is we're doing it and we're trying to sort of conquer the world with it, but it's like us against the world because nobody else is doing it and it's not mainstream yet. And people haven't taken that ethos of being responsible in their practice of AI.
Well, and one
So
thing that you highlighted is the right education, starting at education. I think it starts even before like the college level though, because like as a great example, do you know how many times my grandma has sent me a picture from Facebook that is so AI generated? She's like, "Can you believe this new crochet?" And I'm like, "Grandma, like it's a community. It's a culture thing now. Like we have to start teaching people at all levels, this is what AI is. How can you tell it's AI, or what are some tips to at least try to, and what is acceptable? And I think that the what is acceptable is going to be different depending on your region, your culture, your background, what you already know, what you're trying to learn. A lot of that is very, very different depending on where you're from and what kind of background you come from. And so I think it's really just trying to meet people where they're at, like there's a lot of social media platforms and a lot of people are on them, and they do know how to tailor their things for different regions because they're doing business in them. So I'm wondering if there's, there's some aspect of that that has to come into play where we're talking about responsibility. And certainly those platforms need to have responsibility, but also maybe help with the education piece.
And all these conversations are very recent, right? I feel like up until late 2022, there weren't many of these discussions, right? Up until 2022, Ashley, Dr. Saisha, the way you were, just saying that the machine learning engineers, they used any kind of content they could get their hands on, copyrighted, non-copyrighted, doesn't matter, as long as I get the content and I guess as long as I get the data I need for my models, I'm okay, right? However, very recently we've been having these conversations, and Ashley, your talk about copyrighted, yesterday, it's really eye-opening, and it reminds me of the latest lawsuit, right, that we have on uh, these organizations who are focused on generated music, like Suno, for
Mhm.
example, right? Um, the Sony Music and other record companies, they are suing them for 125,000 per song that
Mhm.
they've used to generate content. And it also makes me feel like it's such a it's such a new field, right? And um, if let's say, if I'm a company who is looking at generative AI for a new type of modality, um, you know, I I don't know, how things will go right in the future. I, of course, have to take care of all the, copyrighted content. And I'm so glad that there are a lot more conversations where we are focused on protecting, human
Mhm.
artists and their rights, at this time.
You mentioned this is new. I disagree. I don't think it's new. I think that I mean, think about it. How were stories and songs shared before the internet existed? It was sitting down with someone, listening to them, talking to them, hearing a song. You learned from it as a human. You took pieces of that and you morphed it into something new. That's not new. That's being human. The new part is, and now we can do it at a speed of light, and you can look at every single song on the planet and then take something else from it. The speed and the access to everything, I think, is the part that is causing the issues to happen. Like, no one's going to get mad at me if I go to a coffee shop and hear a great song and then go somewhere else and butcher it at a karaoke. No one's gonna be mad at me for doing that other than maybe their eardrums. But if I took all the songs and I, like, made a hit single, with no effort really on my part other than, putting the pieces together to make it happen, then people get mad about it. And so it's making sure that we can pump the brakes, I think, a little bit. It doesn't mean stop. I mean, progress is happening, and I am not the type that thinks AI is all bad, right? But it's with anything else. It's a tool. It has the ability to do things much faster and more efficient than your typical human. And so now we need to find out, how do you put the regulations and the standards in place to pump the brakes when needed?
I think that's a good point, both of you. I think you're both right. I think that the generative part of the new songs, that's new. We've never been able to sort of just say make a song that can sound like reggae mixed with um, Chinese folklore music. We've never been able to do that. But then, actually, you make a good point that to some extent we've all been breaching content policies since our grandmother's days. I mean, when they
Yeah.
told us the story of the rabbit and the tortoise and the hare, for example. I
Yep.
mean, who we never, every time we said that story to kids going to sleep, said this was the author published on this day. And then same with music. I mean, I'm an 80s baby, and I know a lot of our music was original, but a lot of it took snippets from 70s soul and 60s music. And then the 90s people came along and they started stealing our stuff. And I used to get really angry. And I'm like, you can't dub that. That's a proper 80s solid jam. And now these, I guess, are we in millennials now? Whatever the stage we're at now, they're doing the same thing, and they're dubbing songs. I mean, that whole process has been happening. I think that's human nature, which speaks to a good point. We can't govern ourselves properly, and we don't have regulations for our own crazy behaviors, and then we want to impose ideal utopic regulations and governance on AI systems which have been made by humans, which means it's made by the very hands that are hypocritical and contradictory since all man has been born, which creates a sort of paradox, in much the same way that there's a paradox that we created the technology get dependent on it and then get dumber and then can't even help the technology. We also you made the technology with our own biases
But
built in.
there's best practices, right? Like as humans, we also fall on our face and learn not to do it again, right? So there's that
Do we,
element of it
do we
where we
learn?
should know better by now for some things.
We should know better, but I'm I'm an optimist, and hope an optimist is the right word for humans and machines. But the truth is, we're not that great of a species to be saying that we fall and we learn. I mean, you mentioned your grandmother sending that image on Facebook. Dude, I did that like 3 days ago. I was showing a friend a picture of this bird. I'm like, wow, look at this parrot. And my friend who has nothing to do with technology was like, that's clearly AI. I'm like, of course it's not. Look how beautiful it is. This is nature. We Googled it and it was so not a real bird. So
Yeah.
we don't learn. And
But that's where I think the regulations and standards come at play, right? So like I've worked at standards development organizations. The people get together and they say, "Hey, aircraft are really complicated things, but we know that if you do this way, it's going to be more efficient on your fuel." That sounds like a good best practice. And then that gets rolled into specs, right? There is a spec that you follow when building an aircraft because there's best practice that we've learned from, that there's tests, there's ways that we found that don't work, things that are more safe than others. And then those standards get passed into regulations. And if you are building an aircraft and you're not building it to spec, you can't fly it. Right. So yeah, there's an element of just humans be humans, but like there's also like whole orchestrations of standards are developed by people who are doing experimentation. That then goes into becoming laws and regulations, right? Like so there's that stuff has happened,
but
for
by
a very
people
long
who are
time.
doing experimentation, that yes, when regulations are developed by people who are doing experimentation in
Yeah.
that field, totally, yeah. Aviation engineers are saying this cogwheel breaks and this wing is better because we've tested it in flight. Yeah. But what's happening in AI, from my own experience, from what I've seen without mentioning names, but the people who are pumping these regulations or writing these, underwriting massive internationally widespread recognized laws or bills, one, are writing it in very vague, ununderstandable language. Two,
Mhm.
they're writing it from a perspective of lawyers or philosophers or legal minds who have very little intuitive knowledge about the practice.
Mhm.
So I agree with you. You mentioned before, this is a segue into that, but we said the regulations should be developed by both the lawmakers, so the
Mhm.
legal guys, but it should also have an engineering component to us to
Mhm.
say,
Mhm.
this is what really happens, and then likewise should be applied to those engineers to say you can't just use any training data, and it should be applied to also to the regulators who are using ChatGPT to write their NDAs or whatever.
Yeah, but I think that's also back to the speed component that I mentioned earlier is that whole standards development process that I just mentioned, it takes a lot of time. And that's the problem. It's not moving fast enough. And we even see like there's a lot of other standards development. There's tons of ISOs that are coming out on this. Literally just this morning, there's things going on where those are being developed at standards organizations, but they're not fast enough. And so the speed at which this is morphing and evolving, I think, is a prime reason that we're seeing so many issues. Is it's very difficult to get ahead of it and to put some of the regulations in place for that. And I think that's why, like, have the lawyers pair up with that engineer. You mean the engineer that's only been working on it for the last 8 months? Right? Like they're not really that. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're more expert than the legal person, and certainly they know best practice in engineering and in data and in privacy and in copyright. Like they should know those things. But, it's a little bit of the Wild West right now.
Yeah, and I think in my experience, the laws and the standards, they've always been a bit behind to catch up,
Mhm,
with
mhm,
technology and the speed at which it moves. And I know, I was reading through the different regulations, right, that we have. There's EU AI, there is NIST framework, there is, Chinese regulation, and in the Chinese regulation, they've set that expectation that because the technology is changing so fast, this standards are expected to evolve, right, as we go along. And it takes a whole ecosystem, right, to come together and write the standards and framework and policies in such a way that makes sense, and that that is applicable to what's going on. So I think from that perspective, we do need participation from not just the policymakers, not just the lawyers, but also what Dr. Shaistra was, I think, alluding to, right? The technical folks who are developing the technology, who have that understanding. So everyone, coming together.
Well, and there's the I think the auditing and making sure how is it enforced, right? So, okay, is your AI ethical? Okay, first of all, you need some benchmarks and KPI kind of stuff around that. What does that mean? How do you measure it? You make sure you measure it correctly. And then you need people to come in and look at compliance, like regulatory compliance is a big factor with it as well. So, you know, if you are looking at if something is ethical, maybe a better example is like the leaderboards, the LLM leaderboards that are out there that are so rigged. They're so rigged, but because there's no standards around it, people. I mean, it's a good resource. Don't get me wrong, but it shouldn't be what you make your decisions on. I mean, same goes for when you're talking about even copyright, right? Like there's an there's a Creative Commons that you can put on something, and that will define if something is open and to what degree is it open. When we hear that an AI model is open, they're not meaning the same thing that we do when we say it's open source or a Creative Commons kind of licensing. So even that stuff, like the words that we're using, where I think oftentimes when I hear people say that, they're like, "Oh, this is an open model." I'm like, "Is it? Tell me about this thing. What do they mean by open?" Because the other one that I'm looking at also says open, and it's not the same way that it's not the same definition of open that you're looking at. So, even it's standardization on the terminology and how we're defining some of the stuff, I think would be a good step forward.
Yeah, I guess terminology is an important thing. But then when it comes to regulation, here's the thing: we had round one practice with the World Wide Web, right? It's not entirely a new playground. We kind of had the first step with the internet. We saw what happens with trolls. We saw what happens with bugs, with Trojan viruses. We've had some experience, but what can go right and what can go wrong. And I think a lot of those lessons need to be applied in the next phase, namely when we're looking at local or regional or international regulations. I mean, for the most part, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but I think murder is not allowed anywhere, for example. Okay, so that became a commonly accepted law everywhere. You shouldn't steal, and there's a penalty for it, etc. But when it comes to AI regulation, if some country called Blue Pillow, for example, Blue Pillow country says it's okay to use anything open model, and they haven't defined it properly. Okay, like the example you described, Ashley. And then Green Plant country comes along, and Green Plant and Brown Table country comes along and says, we've defined what these things mean, and everyone in this country will now follow these regulations. The issue comes about when somebody in Brown Table and somebody in Green Plant country produces a model that can be used in all of those countries. So the person in Blue Pillow country has created a model that is being used in those other countries. So how do you regulate then internationally those rules when it's been sub-defined poorly in some and not in other areas?
I mean, that's
how do you make everyone follow the rule?
Well, that's where local regulations and laws. I mean, look at TikTok, right? It's apparently getting banned in the United States. It's already banned in India, but you can use it in other countries, right? Like this is a common thing. Like laws are set down into place for the populace that has to be governed by them, and then whoever.
But we're talking about development laws. We're not talking about blocking an entire software. So like blocking TikTok means you just block.
But like GDPR is another good example, right? Like there's certain states in the United States that, if you don't have any dealings with anyone in Europe, you don't have to worry about GDPR. Everyone does though, because they always want that option to work with anyone in Europe. But I mean, or Apple, right? There's tons of stuff going on with Apple right now.
Shouldn't we all be respecting those ideals that are outlined in
Yeah, I think
GDPR?
that that's what we're doing though, right? Like there's a lot of other countries that even if they're not doing business in Europe, they are seeing the value of what GDPR is doing and saying, "Oh
What about
yeah,
those states
we
that
should do
aren't
this."
though? You just said there are states that don't follow the GDPR. What about them?
So the way that it works is you just don't do business in those areas. And when I say states, it's that there's no state, and it depends on the country, right? Like the United States is a bunch of little states, but there's a federal government that passes things down.
Mm.
So, it depends on what country you're in. It depends on what your regional setup of government is. But if you want to do business in a different country, you have to abide by their laws. That's, I mean, how you
I
do
get
business.
that, which it makes sense, cool, if you want to do business. But what I'm alluding to is more, how do you regulate people from using bad AI models? I mean, I don't know if I'll give you an example. There's a dark version of ChatGPT. I forget what it's
Mhm.
called. It's like a malicious one, and basically people ask it bad stuff like how to break into a window, or
Mhm.
I don't know, whatever, something malicious or maligned. And so people will be able to develop those kind of LLMs, or people will be able to develop other AI generated music content that copyright somebody else's work. The point I'm making is there's the capability of not just doing business in another country. When you develop a model, you should be following certain ethical regulations about
Yeah,
developing
but
that.
there's always gonna be bad actors, right? The dark web exists for a reason.
But
Like,
that's what
there's
we're
bad
talking
people
about.
out there doing bad things no matter what regulation you pass.
True, but how do we fix it? That's what I'm saying. How do
I
we
think
learn from the web experience?
I think this all goes back to the beginning where innovation and the development of this technology is being distributed and mutated so quickly that
Mhm.
we're unable to implement not just draft and implement the ruling system, but enforce it and learn from the enforcement because
Mhm.
it's a whole feedback loop and
Yep.
we're not learning fast enough. We
And
won't know what to do. I mean, I think one of the things that they do, Hugging Face and all these companies that have these models that they're giving away, open source, right? Open source, air quotes. They keep track of who downloads what. At
Mhm.
least you got some tracking of that ID of that model. You can see if it's been distributed. Maybe it has some metadata that shows who downloaded it originally. I mean, I'm sure that they have some sort of mechanism to at least tag what people are consuming. I would like to believe that that's the case, right? I hope. I don't know.
Well, and I mean, as an example, there's a lot of libraries out there, like, Carnegie Mellon had this was years and years ago, had a really great language model, not large language model. I think it was called Llama. And you could just go and download it and just go and use it. Like, there's models that have existed. I mean, go on to GitHub, find your pick your algorithm that you want to use. People can download those and use them how they want. But, I think it's really thinking through what is at the end of the day, right? As humans, you care about things for survival. So if you know this thing is going to hurt you and you do something badly with it, or it's going to hurt others, you pay more attention to it. And so I think, going back to Shaista, some of the things you said very early on is like, what are the risks? I think really outlining what those are and what back to the ecosystem, what are the things in the ecosystem that play a role in any of those risks, I think is a good mapping exercise, because then even if you don't know what the standards are, even if you don't know what law is going to, be enforced with whatever it is, you can at least say, okay, I care about harming people. What are the things in my model that could affect people downstream or upstream? And let me make sure that I focus on those and I will, figure it out. Um, that at least is something that people could take and start to build upon. And even as a community, we can start to fill out together a little bit more on like, what are the risks? How do you mitigate them? How do you check for them? But I don't even know if that's well known yet.
I think if we were to represent states as cave people, AI is fire, and
Mhm.
we haven't yet touched the fire to know that it can burn you, or at least if we're aware, we know it's a heat source, but we haven't really fully experimented or developed guidelines in our tribe or international markets to be able to better deal with it.
Yeah, and just to extend that example, right? AI has been likened to fire, electricity.
Mhm.
There have been comparisons to even nuclear power, right? And
Mm.
internet, as Dr. Shaista was saying. So it is a new, right? It is a new field, and that doesn't mean we cannot take learnings from what has happened there. Um, like the 100% agree with you, Ashley, when you said defining the harms, right? If there are scientists who argue, right, that AI even has existential level threat,
Mm.
or could have, so if there is even an iota of probability there, then we should be, taking it seriously, not just on a national level, but an international level, and defining, some rules that apply on an international level to everyone, not just, these different countries where we have the potential to do business.
Yeah. I mean, it's in what's the incentives, right? The incentive structure here. Like you would think we want to be good humans and not do bad things. But unfortunately, there also needs to be an incentive for many, not all. I mean, some people really just truly are awesome and want to be good humans, but that's certainly not everyone. And
Maybe
so what are the incentives?
we could all just learn good habits. I mean, if there's a big influencer or a company that starts making it cool, and everybody else follows along, maybe it can become the new norm. And that might be a good way to learn. And as you mentioned, we're supposed to be learning from each subsequent failure. And we definitely had a lot of failures in the internet. And I don't know if you remember a few years ago, and suddenly they started adding those mandatory cookie requirements or those GDPR requirements. And we learned that at a very late stage into the internet life cycle. We can adopt from those learnings, and then we need to make sure that this whole sort of social ecosystem embraces the idea of responsible design as a cool thing or as a norm. And we've got people like Ashley doing these great YouTube videos on exactly that. We've got Joaquin doing these seminars on exactly that. We've got Ruchika working in the industry to make sure that that becomes applied at a corporate level. So we've got all these great players working in that scheme, but I do think it needs to become a socially accepted norm to design responsibly. And then that requires knowing the terminology and knowing the regulations and knowing the rules, which means who's going to set those regulations. And that's what we covered earlier.
But I think we're always going to have sociopaths and psychopaths, and that's the danger. That even though ideally in a utopian society, everybody works together in harmony to create more for everybody to have a better quality of life, we still have to safeguard ourselves and society against somebody pressing a nuclear button and exploding us all back to the Stone Age, or in this case, hijacking other people's identities to
Mhm.
falsify and impersonate people or steal identities or um, compete at a unreasonable level in an international marketplace and swallow up a bunch of resources. Um,
Well, it's helping people understand what the AI is too. I think, just you said early on, like some, but too many people watching sci-fi movies. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like we have to be very aware of what the AI can and cannot do. Like, again, maybe I'm in the minority, but I'm like, hey, it's just a really really smart calculator. It can do just a lot more than a normal calculator. And just like any other calculator, you can still spell the word hell if you put in the right numbers on your calculator, right? Like, as a silly kid, you
Exactly.
did that or someone did. I didn't, but I know a lot of
I
people that
did.
did. But you know what I mean? Like that's you can use any tool for good or for bad. And I think that's where we go back to let's just be very aware of what it is, right? Like even um so as a good example, I was talking to a lawyer and talking about, a big case that came out in the news where a lawyer was using ChatGPT. ChatGPT made up precedents, court cases. The lawyer did not realize that ChatGPT could make stuff up. He used it in court, so on and so forth. That happened. So I was talking to a lawyer about ChatGPT in general, and she's like, "Oh, that's so cool. What does that do?" And she didn't know what it was and what it could do and what it couldn't do and what it could be used for. And I think just that education and getting out of the sci-fi realm, because a lot of it is a little sci-fi-y, right? If we're all being honest. Um, it's getting to that stage where people at least have a base understanding of it. But it's going to happen in starts and stops, just like social media. Like I remember when my grandmother's like, "Why aren't you on Facebook? Everyone's on Facebook." Meanwhile, I was on Facebook in college and then got rid of it because she was on it. Like, these things happen, and certain pockets will learn more about it, and then it'll get old and boring for them, and it'll move on to somebody else, and they'll start to learn more about it. And it's that's really how a lot of invention works, right? The light bulb was invented in two different countries around the same time, right? Like these things are just kind of growing in pockets. But I think it's really being realistic about what it is and what it's not is also probably a good step.
It's a great point. By the way, you mentioned something so spot on. We've been talking a lot about abuses and how we can potentially abuse these systems, but you mentioned also something, you highlighted a great point, which is misuse, unintentional misuse, like that lawyer dude did. And that happens again when people aren't educated.
Yes.
And so in the guy who spoke before me in the presentation day, he was talking a lot about how seemingly overhyped LLMs are, or they're misinterpreted as being something that they're not, where it's very much like you said, Ashley, they're large calculators, in this case specifically a calculator that works on text. It's not a secret, magic answering ball that has all the answers correctly. And you should just learn to depend on it blindly. So there's another element at the social level of educating people, not just on terminology, but on actual use of these very powerful tools, which can lead to harm, like that lawyer and perhaps his client.
Well, and it's fascinating, this trust contract that some people have, like what's going on with Google right now, who is eating its own tail with its Gen AI answers, right? People, for better or for worse, have learned to trust what Google has put at the top of its page. And then it was generating these AI responses, and people just trusted it. And are starting to realize that, it's not the Google that they learned to trust all those years ago. And it's very fascinating to see that they're kind of going against their own trust contract that they've spent so long building. I'm really fascinated to see how some of that stuff works, where, it goes for any other social media that you maybe trust. I think maybe social media, like, not everyone trusts certain ones because of certain news and other things that have come out. We all intrinsically know there's some bias in there somewhere, and they're trying to sell us all on something. But there's also, again, we all sort of kind of trust things from certain platforms, and now with the Gen AI, some of those trust contracts are being broken, and I think that's a really fascinating conundrum where these companies that have spent so much money on building that trust are now kind of imploding it.
I wanna jump on that. So you're talking about Google using generative AI, which is a fancy calculator that's inserts words and spits out words, but it's not necessarily grounded on facts.
Yes.
Who's responsible for, who's liable, and who assumes the risk in the use of that tool if nobody knows what the hell that tool is capable? And then I'll toss it over to Ruchika, because I know she's been involved with the risk management frameworks at Deloitte, and implementing tools internally and externally. She's trying to navigate this every day. So I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Google is such a fascinating, case study, right? As a whole, so to speak. They were the pioneers in a transformer model back in 2017. And now, if you ask Google AI, how many rocks can I eat per day? Oh, up to 3 or 4 rocks is okay. So it's such a fascinating, topic. And in terms of, responsible, right? I was going to do a case study on it, but I didn't get a chance to work on it, right? It's really amazing to even think about. Um, in terms of responsible, I think it lies with the, going back to the ecosystem, discussion. It lies in the overall, ecosystem, not just the product development team, but also, um, the users who are, entering these, ridiculous queries, and they are, trying out, things for fun. And they need to not blindly trust what they are seeing, but also validate the sources. And same goes back to the lawyer example, right, Ashley, that you mentioned. Did they blindly trusted the GPT response, where it made up even docket numbers and even the headings of the cases, and they didn't even validate whether they are real cases or not. So it goes back to even the users making sure that the response I'm seeing, is it trustworthy? How do we validate it? Plus, of course, from a development process perspective, the data set that we are using to train the model, is it high quality? Are we only looking at Reddit responses, Reddit threads, that somebody has just somebody has just put in there? So going back to data quality, starting there, and then again going back to this whole ecosystem, and appropriate testing as well, where before we roll out the whole product. And I do want to go back to one comment that Dr. Shaistra had made, right, around the social aspect of it, right? During COVID-19, we saw schools talking about appropriate hand washing protocol, right? And even the kids, there were anthems, and the kids were singing about it, and that's how really we got to know that what are the preventative measures we can take so that we are safe from COVID-19. What if we look at enrolling someone like Taylor Swift to spread the message about AI safety? So the social aspect definitely has its own merit, in my opinion, and we should explore that when we talk about education and creating more awareness and literacy.
Well, one thing you said that I think is the trickiest part of all of this is whose truth? Whose truth? We are very opinionated humans. So you can read lots of articles that say vitamin C will help you in your cancer journey, and a bunch of other ones that will say, no, it will actually give you cancer. I'm making that example up. I don't know if that's true. But the point is, there's a lot of research that says one thing, and a lot of research says another. There's a lot of opinions about certain things. So which truth is true? Right. And that's going back to there's different cultures. Like, I mean, a good example that I came across in my early days of like building out knowledge graphs, which are supposed to be sources of truth, is there's a little part of water between, I think, Korea and Japan. And is it the Korean Sea or the Sea of Japan? I think that's the debate. It's a debated body of water. And depending on where you live, you will call it something different, and you will find the other one very offensive. That's maybe a benign, mostly benign example, and maybe I'm getting the countries wrong on it. But if you look it up, that's one of them that are out there. So what do you do there, right?
If I can just interject, I mean, we have something called the scientific method, and I mean, this has been a well-developed system for centuries. And the scientific method is such that you'll have a null hypothesis and you have an alternate hypothesis, as to say something is not or something is, and then you run experiments on it. And the true beauty of scientific research is that it should be, one, replicable, and two, it should be cited, so that each statement that you make within your scientific paper has a citation for where you got that definition or that statement. And then because your experiment is reproducible, the next person who does any adjustment on your scientific experiment would cite you. So I think when it comes to whose truth, you could argue that even in the scientific world, whose truth, I mean, if that vitamin C example that you gave, that you said one causes a sickness and one doesn't, that's actually part of the scientific experiment, is to say which truth. And the way in which we approach that is we continue doing multiple studies down both avenues until something shows an association of variables that is more convincing. An area in which machine learning is adding a great benefit in science, in fact, in being able to show heat maps or correlations of variables to show how you find a truth. Again, there's a philosophical aspect to whose truth, but then there's also an approach that the scientific community has a respectable way of dealing with that and accepting all opinions.
Right, but that's the opinion part, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's what you have to think about with this.
There was a podcast I did with an osteo studies bones, but it studies the history through bones. Anthropologists. Anyways, she was focused on studying the evolution of the Silk Road and
Mm.
trade by looking at the artifacts and bones that led from China to Europe.
Mm.
And we were talking about that the evolution of people and society has advanced because we've been able to fashion better tools like fancier and fancier calculators. But the brain and our opinion and our culture still makes up a large aspect of how we behave in society. So, though we want to rely on the scientific method and we want to say, this is my C or that's your C, or I made empanadas, or this country made empanadas, or I have the best wine and your wine sucks, and we came up with that recipe, it's still the emotional, cultural fabric that is pulling at the strings of society. And
Mhm.
I don't know how we can navigate that cultural or influential or political layer because it's also part of the reality we live in.
And I think that's right. It's the reality, and it's making sure that so often when I hear people giving examples of like bad AI responses, it's okay, how many, like the rock example. Oh, 4 rocks is not bad. Okay, medically speaking, if you eat 4 rocks, maybe it's saying that you will not kill over, right? But that's not what the answer was, right? The answer was a one sentence response. Shasta, to your example on research, one research said vitamin C causes cancer, one says it helps with cancer, but all the little nitty-gritty things are what tells you which side is appropriate to your actual use case. But in many of the AI cases that I and everyone has used as examples, it's a one sentence response. It doesn't give you all that nuance for you to then kind of pick it apart and understand what parts of it are true for you in your use case versus something else. And I think that that's the other thing where so many, including me, right? Like this yesterday, I was talking about hallucinations and how to decrease hallucinations. The whole reason these AIs can write so human-like is because they have creativity, i.e., hallucinations. Right? So we're trying to use a tool for an unintended purpose a little bit with this. Is I want the truth, darn it, and this is what I want from it. Okay, but then it's not gonna be as creative and it's gonna sound back to the before times when it was more of a robot, right? So it's like we want our cake and we wanna eat it too.
I want to first say two points, and then I want to ask Ruchika's opinion on this. But the first part is explainability. Explainability algorithms sort of solve that to some extent, or even just including citations. So if
Mhm.
if if the LLM said to you, "Yo, you could eat 4 rocks," put a citation so that the person can
Mhm.
click on it and see if it was from rocklovers.com, or if it was, I don't know if that's a website, sorry, like if it was something like that, or if it was from eathealthy.com, and then
Mhm.
you would be able to discern and say, I trust it or I don't trust it. And then the other thing with hallucinations is it's exactly what you said. We're misusing the tool for what it actually is. It's a
Mhm.
language model. It's meant to find
Mhm.
words and
Mhm.
make predictions on words. It's not meant to give you your be all and end all. So people are misusing it. But hallucinations as such are, the model tried its best. You imagine like a small C3PO or R2D2 just
Mhm.
saying, you said yellow box, and it's running around looking for yellow box, and then it finds the closest thing to a yellow box, and it's like, yo, I tried, here's yellow box, and it'll be like a round blue ball, or a
Mhm.
red ball, and it'll say, here, red ball, I tried, it was the closest thing I could find to the parameters. And so I guess you could argue, yeah, to an extent it's creativity, but it's also an embedded limitation within a language model's capabilities that's being misused. And then people are saying, oh, my model's hallucinating. Your model hasn't been trained on the right data. Your
Mhm.
model hasn't been
Or it's
fine-tuned,
missing data.
or misconstrued data. And then you've got people misusing it for on domains that model hasn't been trained for.
Mhm.
So that again comes down to not just saying, that it's going to have these hallucinations that are creative, but what is it actually designed for? And it's back to your earlier point where there's a misuse case,
Mhm.
which is actually, Ruchika, where I wanted to ask you your opinion on that, and in terms of governance and how it's being managed, in terms of people misusing the tools.
Yeah, I think we will always have, folks that will, try to test the tool's limits. We had one case at Samsung, right, where the employee actually gave out very sensitive information
Mhm.
to ChatGPT and they banned it. So it's always the people aspect. Even in cybersecurity, people
Mhm.
are the social engineering is the most popular way to penetrate a company's network, and people are the weakest links, right? So there's always the people aspect of making sure that we communicate all the right guidelines and the guardrails that and help them understand, going back to the literacy topic, right? Help them understand what the tool can do, what are the limitations, what kind of data should you use it with, what kind of data should you not use it with. So that is like the education piece of it, which is so critical as organizations, as companies, we roll out these tools. um, and going back to the explainable AI perspective, right? There is this I was reading about the DARPA's explainable AI
Mhm.
program that is
Mhm.
um, that is focused on areas like which has high impact, like healthcare, finance, military. So looking at those aspects as an as a country, as overall nation, is something that definitely we should be looking at, and having more explainable model and not just black boxes on how we arrived at the decision, right? That's what transparency is
Mhm.
about, right? The user's understanding on how it came to a solution, or going back to the sources that refer to, the users would need to trust where it came from.
I want to draw a quick parallel here. I really like watching Bollywood movies. They are musical. I love Indian culture. I love the food. I love the music. But one thing that I find really interesting with the difference in media production in India versus America is that if an Indian movie has a representation of the use of tobacco or consumption of alcohol or domestic, some sort of something that incites violence, there's like a 20 to 60-second long introduction that tells you the Surgeon General recommends that you do not consume these products because they may lead to cancer, and then they flash you like the black lungs and the
Mhm.
cancerous tissue, and they scar your mind with like, yo, don't consume this, it's bad. But if you do it, it's your fault. In
Mhm.
America, they don't do that, so it's also the relationship of the governance, the culture, what is deemed acceptable, how much risk do you assume as the corporation that is engaged in these activities, and how much social responsibility do you have as an organization that uses and sells these products and services to inform the society. If you use our product and service, here's how it can impact you.
And we've talked a lot about, like, cultures, but there's also age appropriateness, and, I mean, obviously, there's cultural elements to that as well, but, there's you don't want some, Disney character talking to you about this, hard-hitting, very adult topic. So, if you're rolling out AI for things, you have to also like, in the reading space, there's something called, like, your reading level, right? Like, what reading level are you at? It's sort of like that where, what response is okay to give to a 5-year-old compared to a 12-year-old compared to a 17-year-old. Um, that also is an element that I don't see a ton of research yet from the AI space. I think because there's so many other like, huge other areas. But that's one of those things where Ruchika, you were talking about like areas that are high risk. I think our kids are high risk. I feel like, yes, military, yes, medical, but yes, kids, right? And I think, like, that's the other thing that, strangely enough, a lot of the kids that I know, and again, like, this is personally speaking, I know, just a few handfuls of kids. I'm sure there's lots of kids out there that are like, "Oh, yeah, ChatGPT, I use that every day for homework." A lot of them are just like, "Yeah, I don't trust that. That freaks me out. I don't like that." And that's fascinating to me too because, there's a heavy dose of people that I talk to that are very excited about AI. And then, the kids that I thought would be, like, all over it and so excited are like, no, that's creepy." And I do wonder, like, where we're going with that aspect of AI because, yeah, it doesn't seem to be as hot of a topic as some of the other things.
there's an AI bubble that everyone metaphorically talks about that might burst. And I think my opinion, my subjective opinion on that bubble bursting, which alludes to what you're saying, is when people realize what it actually is versus what it's being marketed. And that again speaks back to that misuse. So lawyers or any other professionals who are depending on these tools with the wrong intent, or with a certain intent that is misaligned to the tool's actual purpose, is when that guy's bubble got burst. And then very quickly, a company is going to do the same thing, and their bubble is going to get burst. And all those CEOs who are saying deploy, deploy, deploy without looking at the quality assurance, their bubble is going to get burst. And then, as these, you were talking about that I don't know, law or bill that's being passed about giving content producers their credit. That's going to burst a lot of media bubbles for people who jumped on that media AI train. So I think it's like those kids, they're intuitively saying there's a bubble here that might be bursting because it's being said to be what it's not. I guess we have to be honest about its use case again.
Makes me wonder how much money is going to be. I mean, there's a lot of folks that I've heard say, "Oh, we had to go into doing something with AI for our board or for our shareholders or whatever, and it did this much to our stock prices." It's like, yeah, but like that was a lot of money that you had to shift over to that. What happens when the bubble bursts?
That's it. So there was that huge hype, just like there was the .com hype. There's all this hype around things, and then at some point, reality kicks in, which is something we keep telling company owners or investors who are investing in AI. We keep saying, do you want your investment to actually last? Because if you do, you need to be running some sort of risk assessment on the models you're investing in, because they'll drift. The model will drift. The data will drift. The data might be poor data, as Ruchika mentioned, or it might be not metadata, as Ashley mentioned. And when that happens, karma is going to come around, or justice is going to show its face and say, who used what data? Did you use this without permission, or did you use any model that you found on GitHub? And eventually these things will come to light, and that's when the bubble bursts. So we've got to be careful about the hype, but I think it's too late. I mean, media, news, social media. You even looked at LinkedIn. People are just posting random crap that's not true about AI, and everyone's like, woohoo, 10,000 likes, 10,000 followers on that comment. Completely untrue. So again, that guy Giuseppe who spoke before me on the LLM model, I think he was really spot on when he highlighted how and what it should actually be used for. But again, not everyone who watches a TV knows how the TV picture gets on your screen. And not everyone who's going to use an AI app is going to understand how those models get their answer. And I think one of the good practices would be, like we said, citations, the way we do it in research and literature. If a response comes out, put a citation and make it clickable. Let's see, let the end user have some choice and freedom as part of the responsibility. Let there be an explainable AI algorithm that is interpretable for the end user, again, to impart that trustworthy transparency. And then let education happen both for the engineers and for the average end user as to what the capabilities are as part of social responsibility.
I was with you, and then I heard someone tell me, because I made the example, I make the same argument that you're making, and a lot of it goes back to, again, that information literacy. A lot of people don't know what's trustworthy, which is unfortunate, even when it comes to citations. So I was like, yeah, I got this response from the Google AI response, and it said, according to Reddit. And I said, who's going to trust what Reddit says? And this
Exactly.
very good engineer was like, well, I do. I go to Reddit to find things all the time. And I'm like,
I mean, it depends on your purpose. If you're looking for what's your opinion on Red Sox and how many people like Red Sox,
how do you
cool,
beat
Reddit
this
might be a good source.
level in a video game? Yeah, go to Reddit. But if I'm trying to figure out something else.
But at least the end user with something like a citation can have that choice to discern
Yes.
on their own.
Yeah, I'm in full support of that. I think that's, but then you have the reproducibility problem, not of the research, but of the AI response.
In what sense do you mean?
Well, meaning you can't get the same response twice usually.
You can if you ask the question, the exact same question. I think if you ask one, and you're right to some extent, if you asked Gemini and you asked OpenAI's ChatGPT, how do I make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or peanut butter and jam sandwich? They might give you different instructions, each one. And so where a lot of companies that we've been doing risk assessments for, they rely entirely on one particular model, and we tell them, how trustworthy is your response to your customer, where you're giving either healthcare information to or financial information or advice to, where you're getting all of your feed from one particular model, versus the instructions to make that sandwich could be different from different models. So yeah, in that way, reproducibility does become an issue. But again, if there was something like embedded citations or explainable AI algorithms, you could know with each response a confidence score for
Yep.
each particular variable association or algorithmic node connection to say this decision process was made correctly. The way we do with humans, when you ask a kid, why did you break that glass? And now you're watching the kid answer you, and you're actually watching strategically his neural network and the node process he took to say, I saw the glass, it irritated me, so I whacked it. And then you'd follow that, or another kid might say, I didn't see the glass, it was an accident, and I lied because I was afraid. Either way, you're following the decision making process. And if we do that with humans, which we do intuitively, we should be able to do that with a man-made creation, something
Yeah,
like
I mean, that's
machine.
why in my talk that I did earlier with this, it was all about knowledge graphs, right? Because then it gives you that explainability along with what your AI is doing. And you can, it's so funny we talk about citations so much in this. I talked a whole lot about citations to do exactly what we're talking about here. But and that's, I'm not going to open up a can of worms. And yes, but can you trust what the academic research article was saying? Because there's all kinds of news articles about those just fully being made up from AI now. Not a lot, but some, enough for you to be a little worried. And then there's also like, people just citing each other because they're friends, and like there's all those other human things that we've been dealing with even before AI when it comes to research. But yeah, I mean, I think giving more information to the end users so they can make their own decisions is key. But then it's people still make decisions, and they're not going to always make the right
There's
decisions.
always going to be that cobweb of mistrust. You're right. And until when, where did you get that information from? And then where did you get that? And who did that source get it from? And how trustworthy or trusting is that entire process?
Well, this not to. I mean, I am the knowledge graph person, right? But knowledge graphs have been used for supply chain management for a very long time, for cyber physical systems, right? I have this computer chip in my vehicle. Well, where did that come from? Well, I don't know. I don't know where I got it from this supplier. Well, if you start to use your knowledge graph to map back, you got it from supplier X, but supplier X got it from supplier Y, and supplier Y is from a country that is trying to like hack your systems. Probably not something you want to put in your, spacecraft that's going to space that you need to trust about this stuff. So, having the way to understand all the components in the system, right? Like even when we're talking about responsible AI, we in the ecosystem, okay, well, where did the data come from? Who was it from? When was it pulled? All of those like little pieces. I'm a big fan of, in the knowledge graph space, there's a triple, right? It tells you how one thing is connected to another thing, but you can make this thing called
Traceability. Yeah.
but you can have quad, right? Where there's that plus an ID that basically like connects to a whole accountability. Like when did it pass these reliability checks? Is it considered current? Did it comply with all the constraints? Is it trustworthy because it comes from these sources? Like there's all those other things that you can build out into models behind the scenes. But if you're just using a regular LLM with that hard stop, or if you're even doing RAG with it and you are grounding it, but you're only grounding it on the full text or the unstructured text, you're kind of assuming what's in that unstructured text is correct and accurate, but you don't actually really know that. And, you only have that one citation. You don't know like where all the other stuff and all the different components in the ecosystem that went into it.
I'm gonna jump in here real quick.
Sorry, I just want to agree and tell her I think knowledge graphs are an amazing method of traceability.
We're drawing near to the end of the conversation, so I'm gonna hand you all a 2-minute wand. So take that wand and just from your perspective, what do you think could be done to create a responsible AI ecosystem?
Rishuga, I think you should start.
Okay, I will start. So just to end this, I guess, conversation on a positive note, I think where we are where we are right now is amazing, and what we've been able to achieve with LLMs is amazing. There are a lot of concrete applications, and many use cases where it has been successfully applied. Um, my sentiment is being cautiously optimistic and making sure that we are proceeding forward with the research, with the next frontier, carefully, with responsibility, and oh, that's so cute, with appropriate responsibility and trustworthy principles in mind. Not ignore the social aspects, but also have something on an international level, some ground rules at an international level. So and like always, I have faith in humanity, and every challenge that humanity has encountered, we have come to the other side, emerging winners. And I just wanted to end on the positive aspect, and give my 2 cents that moving forward with being cautiously optimistic.
Nice.
Ashley, yours.
I would leave it on bookends to things, right? So the information literacy, I think, is so key, is just from all levels trying to educate more on how do you know something is trustworthy? How do you define something is appropriate? How do you know if something is ethical? And having those discussions, because there's no right answer yet, right? Like we are still making discussions and findings and all of that. And on the other side is those standards organizations, right? So ISOs, international standards. So that means people from a lot of different backgrounds who are doing a lot of different experimentation come together and discuss what is the best possible amalgamation of all the knowledge that they have to then speed it into different regulations. And whoever gets to the regulations first, that's also a good thing, because then other countries, other organizations can learn from that and start to pick up on it. So, starting on one side of the bookend is like getting that education, getting people familiar with what it is, what it isn't, what's appropriate, all of those things, having a lot of discussions and making it easily accessible to have discussions with a lot of different people, because I think that's how you get the best sharing of knowledge. And then on the other side is then making it actionable with a lot of different cultures and perspectives and experimentation, and making it something we can all start to get behind.
Cheers. Ruchika and Ashley, I don't know that I can top what either of you said. I agree wholeheartedly with everything you said. Being someone who's spent a lifetime in science, I perhaps am biased in my opinion, but I do believe that things like explainability algorithms, the scientific method, citations for references, and imposing scientific rules as we have on all other technologies or all other scientific methods on this new scientific tool is one method, in addition to what Ruchika and Ashley has said, but is one other solid method in which we can ensure that we continue to follow in our successes of the past of science, and perhaps give us an opportunity to learn from our failures previously. So I believe the scientific method is the right way, and scientists should make all the rules.
I don't know if I agree that scientists should make all the rules, but
Not all the rules, but most of the rules. And then also Obi, the cat that you just saw, he has the opinion that whatever it makes sure that he's safe is the right way. So we'll always consider our animals.
yeah.
Great. Well, I think we've had a very lively discussion. Ruchika, did you have a final thought or something else you'd like to weigh in with?
No, I think we all did such a great job. My life was enriched after this discussion, and really glad I was able to participate in it.
If I may just pick your brain for 1 minute, what are some of the top priorities when you do involve yourself at a corporate level, or you're representing Deloitte, or Deloitte's clients, and engaging in these AI initiatives? I just out of curiosity.
Yeah. So I work with a lot of technical folks, data scientists. They have a very different perspective when they, attack a problem. They think model first. However, I always encourage to take a step back, think about the problem first, right? Think about what is the real value add we are going to solve with this, with this challenge. And making sure that we understand the problem, the use case, what kind of value it will add, whose life we will, make better when we solve the problem, by how much it will be, made better, and so on. So understand the problem thoroughly. Then look at the data, the quality of data, whether we have the right quality of data or not, whether we have the accuracy, timeliness, completeness, and all those factors which make good data quality. And then model comes at a very latter stage. So that is the kind of thinking I champion in my team. And so that's the whole. And then of course when we are building, when we get to building these systems, the aspect of trustworthy kicks in, even while we are looking at the data. Is it biased? Is it does it have any outliers? If there are outliers, understanding those. So it's a process, thinking about from a different aspect, thinking about all the different aspects. And I ensure that we have diversity in the team, diversity of thoughts, so that it's not just one person's perspective that we are considering. Going back to the whole ecosystems, not just scientists making the rules, but everyone coming together. So that's the kind of process we follow.
Well, thank you very much. I think that sums it up pretty nicely. And
I just want to say thank you, Joaquin. Another amazing event with
Yes.
spectacular speakers, Ashley and Ruchika and Joaquin. You provide us these great opportunities. We're very grateful to you, and we're very proud of the Swarm community.
rock on. Well, we're going to take a little break and then we're going to go to the next one. I'm going to go get some grapefruit. So I'll see you shortly.